Hello developers, how are you doing? Hope you enjoyed the other videos from the same series. So we have published 4 videos so far from the React interview question series, and this is the fifth one. So in this video, we are going to discuss things like lazy, suspense, and a bit about React styling. I hope you like the video the same way you did for the previous ones. So if you have any further questions or comments about it, please go ahead and ask them in the comment section of this video. We'll get back to you with answers. So without any further delay, let us get started. So in part 5, we'll be handling questions related to styling in React, the concept of suspense, lazy, code splitting. These are the areas we'll be focusing on and taking questions and try to explain like what are each of these things, from the fundamental way. Okay, so let's go to the first question. The first question is, what is the ideal way to style a React app? $1 million question. Why? Because there are so many options, there are so many possibilities. And as a React developers, they always feel like, oh man, there are so many possibilities, which one to pick? And I think that is when there are two factors come into picture. One is like what's in trend, like what everybody is using. And second thing is like what is need for me, like, possibly whatever somebody else is using, it may not be really a useful thing for me because my circumstances, my use cases are different. So we need to look into both the aspects and see like if we can actually take some middle path and select the one that works best for us. So several possibilities exist. What are those possibilities that exist? So to style a React app, you can do inline styles, you can do global styles. For example, you can keep a CSS file, all the styles into that, and then import the CSS file and use the styles from that. Or you scope your CSS to the modules. You can use like CSS modules and then import the styles from the CSS modules and use it. Or you can go to the next level and start using syntactically awesome style sheet like SAS or SCSS, where you can go beyond just traditional CSS. You can write logic. You can things like do like reusable CSS stuff. So it's quite fancy. The SAS thing is very good. And then you can do CSS in JS. So separation in concern is, or separation of concern is one thing. Like you want HTML to do its job, CSS to do its job, JavaScript to do its job. But if you are a React developer, you are actually taken a bit different path already. In JSX, you have JavaScript and your component structure, which is like HTML already together. So it means that if you want to have CSS along with that, it's not that bad. So it means that a component already have its own logic, JavaScript logic is structure using HTML, and also can have CSS along with that. So it's fulfilled everything as a component. So why not CSS in JS? So that's something that we might want to look into. And at the end, you also have utility first approaches. For example, Tailwind CSS is a trendy factor right now. Love or hate, Tailwind CSS is winning the world at this point of time. There might be something else in the future, but right now is Tailwind CSS. All right, so which one to pick? What is your points to consider? So things to consider while you want to pick something is reusability. So when you're with React.js, you are writing component, and the biggest advantage for the components are that they are reusable. So it means that you create them once and try to reuse them across wherever you want. So reusability should be one of the major factors when you select anything, even in case of CSS. Then the maintainability. So if you write something today, some style today, so tomorrow you are really wondering like, what is this style used for? If I modify this, where and all is going to impact, and that kind of thing. So maintainability of your CSS style should be higher, so that you don't have dangling CSS lying around here and there, and you have to do a lot of cleanup later point of time. Then CSS and JavaScript combo, I told like with JSX we already have the component structure and the component logic together. Then why not CSS also along with this, so that it looks complete. So CSS and JavaScript combo is something that you might want to look into. Ease of use, of course, as a developer you want your ease of use to go higher, so definitely that's something that you want to look into. And then the performance, right? You don't want every time like all your CSS and everything, a lot of stuff kind of gets downloaded on your browser becomes sluggish. So that is another factor that you can keep in mind. Now, keeping all this factor in mind and the kind of options that we have in hand, let us look into these options very quickly and check their pros and cons together, so that when someone asks this question, your answer should not be just a pointed answer. Rather, from this pros and cons, you determine, like, for your situation, this is the approach that I need for styling React, and my answer is that. Okay, so let's look into some of the examples and try to find out the pros and cons. So the first approach that we're going to talk about is inline CSS. So here what we have, like, we have a bunch of styles that we have declared, like a background color, border radius. And if you see that these styles we are using as inline style. So what is inline style? You're using the style in line with your element. So this is the inline styles. So this very much works. And the greatest advantage I would say that of this one is, like, this is one of the quickest way to write your styles. You can write your styles in no time, and for any small projects, that's something that you're just getting started with, this works well. There is no problem actually, right? And but the problem comes is, like, when your project goes bigger, and that time it is really tedious to maintain and manage style in this way. So it means that every component inside that you have done something. So it means that if there is a small styling change also, you are touching your component. Lots of inline style using your JSX actually makes it really unreadable, and it really doesn't scale very well. So it is not good. And one of the vital problem with inline CSS is, like, you cannot use things like media queries. So it means your some of these animations, the responsiveness, those keyframes, those things you cannot use. So it has its own limitation. So this is the first approach that I wanted to talk about. Hope you understand that. Now we'll move to our second approach. In the next approach, we have a global style. So we have a, say, .css file like app.css, where we have declared all the styles, and then we are importing the style. And what we are doing, like, we're taking one of the classes from that particular file and using that as a class name for my component. One great advantage of this approach is, like, in React, like, once you import to the parent component, all your child component automatically gets, all the style defined in the CSS file. So you don't have to re-import it every time on all your child components. So you're saved from that. Also, you have a better approach than your inline styles. It means that you have one place where you are managing all your styles. You can write the CSS variables, you can write all your selectors, pseudo classes, keyframes, media queries. So all the limitations that what you had with the inline styles, you have actually gone past those limitations with this approach, which is great. But the problem is, like, of course, you don't have an ability to do any kind of logical things with styling. Like, it is just plain style definition on your CSS file. You cannot do much logic and things like that with style. So you will be missing that out in this case. You have a lot of boilerplate left for your CSS thing, and you have to use a very good naming convention. So this is where I think the most difficulties and the challenges come into picture. Like, if the naming convention is not right, and there are always a chance that somebody else comes new in the team, will be responsible of making it really bad and messy. So you have to document your stuff pretty well, like how people should be creating the styles. So it brings, of course, some extra headache and things like that. And then the last disadvantage that I can actually recall is none of the styles are scoped well. So all the styles are, like, global. So it means that if you have a home page and home page related styles, so you have to probably create multiple CSS files in that matter. And then if there are common style, you probably have to have a common.css file. So there are a lot of maintainability around, which is not that great. So this approach is good if you are starting something small, or probably you have a legacy project that you are maintaining. From there you are converting to React, and you want to keep the CSS approach as is, don't want to kind of break that apart. This works, but beyond that, I won't suggest you to kind of take this approach forward. Okay, so this is the second one. Now let's move to the third approach. The next approach, we are talking about using Sass, basically the SCSS stuff. So in Sass is radically great than the CSS approach we have seen before. It's much better because here you can really make CSS reusable. So you can write functions, you can write mixins, you can write variables, you can do a lot of stuff. You can extend your CSS, and you can do a lot of stuff with SAS and SCSS. So SAS and CSS have ruled for quite a long time, and it fits okay with React also, but there are some few things that you need to do. Is like, it's not native. For example, to make SCSS work or SAS work, you have to install external dependencies like Node SAS. So you have one dependency to take care, definitely. And then we spoke about CSS, like it's at the global level. There is no modularization as such with the CSS approach. With SAS also is like that. It's again at the global level. There is not much modularization, not much scoping kind of things that you have, right? And of course there's a learning curve. So you have to learn CSS, and on top of that you have to learn the SAS structure and the CSS structure. So I have seen projects like where people are adopting SCSS SAS only because the inline styles and CSS approach were not really good. But we are yet to look into two more approaches. So let's look into them. The next approach is about CSS modules. So what is CSS modules? As CSS originally or natively provide only global scope, there is no modules, there is no scope as such. CSS module actually solves that problem. So it means that you can modularize your CSS based on the component scope. So for example, here I have a component called human, and for that I have created a module. So if you want to create a module, CSS module, you have to do like .module.css as an extension. So I'm using for the human component, there's a human.module.css, and inside human.module.css I have a bunch of styles declared, and you can import them using this particular object notation structure. So for example, all the styles that are defined in the human.modules.css will be accessible through these styles. So once you do styles.head, so it means that this particular module.css has a style called head, and you're actually calling that and setting into a class name. So this is good. This is very well in terms of the scoping. It generates the unique class name to ensure that you won't be having any kind of conflicts in terms of styling. And with if you were using create react app before this, immediately you can actually set it up. But the problem with this one is, like, again, as it generates some of these unique class names, and those class names are so unique, and sometimes you really cannot map those name to the actual styles, right? And you also have to have some kind of learning curve in setting it up with the environment where it is not supported organically. So this is about the CSS modules. Next we are going to see CSS in JS. So CSS in JS is actually a great approach, and it goes very well with something that we're using in React already in form of JSX, where we have the structure which is HTML like, and then you have JavaScript already for logic. Why not bringing in CSS as well? Now to do that, of course, one of the drawback of this approach is, like, you have to rely on, again, a third party, because this is not native, this is not organic. So for example, style components is one of a well-known CSS in JS library which you can install. What do they do? Basically, they allow you to create CSS or define CSS in such a way that after defining the CSS, you can get the React component directly. So for example, here I have my style paragraph, a component basically, and I'm saying that this is nothing but underlying, it is a paragraph, and a paragraph with the following style, and this one I can directly use as my component into my React JSX. So this is very powerful, very strong, and you really don't have to go out anywhere to access your CSS. The modularity of the CSS is also very much there, so it means that this CSS styles are never going to conflict with anything else at outside, and it is very much predictable, because as it is not going to create any kind of conflicts and things like that, you are very much sure that if something getting changed, it will be confined within this component itself. So this is quite good approach, I would say, the CSS in JS stuff. And style components, when it came in for a few years, it ruled really well. People liked this approach. Only thing that I didn't like Like at times it might go very verbose. Like if you're seeing a component which is having many style components, and you have defined those style components like all across at the top of your component, and to get started with your component itself, or reading your component, is you have to scroll down into the file a lot, and then only will reach this component to see like what exactly this component are about. Alternatively, what you can do, you can put your style components in a separate file, export them from there, and then import it into your component, and then kind of start using that. That could be another way to kind of handling that. So that's the approach. And then we are going to our last approach, which is like utility first. So utility first approach, and one of the library which is like ruling the world today, which is called Tailwind CSS. So if you see, like I have this code and where a bunch of Tailwind CSS, utility first styles are written. So why is it so much liked today? The reason being, for developers who are usually doing the JavaScript thing, they are not very CSS savvy, right? They don't like to write CSS that much. So if there is something which is already pre-cooked for you and you just need to kind of call and use it, I think that's the best thing that developers will like. So for example, if you need a white color background, you just do bg-white, it gives you. If you need a padding of something, you do p-2. So things like that you can actually do. If you need a border with the teal color, you do border teal the color strength. So this is basically gives you a lot of handy stuff very quickly, and this is been adopted by developer community so heavily, and it's one of the thing that you must look into if you are doing web development now. But there is a opposite side of it as well. I know there are people who really don't like Tailwind CSS. The reason being is like sometimes it goes really verbose, really big. So if you're seeing that, if I have to really scroll, I have to really scroll it further. Or if I'm making a change somewhere here and you're doing a code review, doing a diffing, that becomes sometimes a bit challenging because there are so many things that you are going to add. Even despite those difficulties, Tailwind CSS is winning the heart just because the flexibility of it, that how easy it is to kind of use. So if you are new to it or still you have a relationship with Tailwind CSS which is not that great, I would say give it some time, try it out and see like whether it is going to solve a lot of the problems that you had faced otherwise managing raw CSS yourself, or inline CSS yourself. This also look like inline CSS, isn't it? It's like inline styles that you are creating, but it's a bit different. Again, I told like with the inline styles you cannot do a lot of stuff, like you cannot do animations, cannot do media queries, all those things. But here these are the references rather, right? So once you use this, it refer to some styles which is there in the background, and it pull that style for you, so you don't really bother about remembering every syntaxes of CSS styling by yourself. So to conclude this answer, select something which goes to your need, your kind of project, and something that you like to use or your team will be adapting to it much better way. There are plenty of options. Some of the options definitely you should rule out. For example, inline styles or using a single CSS file for serving it, you should rule out. Rather, you should be looking around things which is like either CSS in JS or use CSS modules, or maybe the Tailwind CSS way, which is the way that most of the developers are going today. Okay, I hope it answered these questions. Now it's time to move to our next question. What is code splitting? That's the next question that we'll be handling. So in this question, we'll be handling things like code splitting in general, and also how in React code splitting works. So the concept of code splitting is very important for us to understand, and when this kind of question asked, maybe even in an interview, it is good to kind of answer it in a way that what is the problem we usually have without code splitting, and then how code splitting solves the problem, answering both. Okay, so let's get started. So before we get started with the code splitting concepts, let's talk about or understand what is bundling, because bundling has a very good association and the relationship with the code splitting concept. So you first understand what is source code and what is bundling. Usually when you write program specifically on the web development side, you may be using some JavaScript file, some CSS file, there might be some TypeScript file. So all together when these files comes together they actually produce the end application that you run on your browser or your customers run on the browser. Now, at your source code level, these files are individual files. The individual JavaScript file doing its own job, individual CSS file doing its own job, and things like that. But as a whole, when things run on your customer's browser, right? The application run on your customer's browser. It is not like individual this JavaScript file or the CSS file or the TypeScript file that is going to run on your browser, at least with the modern tech stack that we use. If we go a few decades back when web just started and mostly about the web 2 came into picture, that time we used to have like a monolithic mammoth JavaScript file, a huge HTML structure and a huge CSS file, and probably these three individual file used to do its job. But later point of time, the modularization came into picture. We started understanding that keeping everything in one file is going to cause lot of problem. It will be a conflict when multiple people are working on the same file, and again the file size will be growing in size, so there will be a lot of such kind of problems that might arise. So now we have splitted our entire features into multiple source file, multiple JavaScript file, CSS file, TypeScript file, things like that. But at the end of it, all this file has to come together and they kind of get downloaded on your client's machine, and then they get to see this UI. So who does this bundling of all these codes? That's where a bundler come into picture. And what bundler produces a combined JavaScript and a combined CSS taking from all these files, and then what happened is like ultimately this gets run on your client. It gets downloaded on your client browser, and the client gets to see the UI. So what are these bundlers? I'm sure that you must have heard a few names already, like Webpack is one of them, Browserify, you have Rollup. There are various kind of bundlers that does its job. So once you have this bundler, like the bundler produce file, a JavaScript file or the CSS file, this file, it goes to your customer's space, your client's laptop or client devices, and it might take some time, and then finally the application kind of comes up, right? So that's how the things work. Now there are few situations based on which this time taken for this application to fully available for your customer, it depends on few things. One could be the network latency, like the network call might come back very late, or the customer could be on a slower network, or the file sizes itself could be very huge. The JavaScript file or the CSS file that's getting downloaded to your client's browser, this itself could be very huge, and that is causing some kind of delay, right? So we don't want this kind of experience at all to give to our end customers. We want the end customers experience should be much better. Also, another thing to keep in mind over here is like, though we have all bundle JavaScript, bundle CSS, your customer at a single point of time may not require all the features that are bundled on this JavaScript and the CSS files, right? Maybe your customer is on the home page and he just needs that home page. He doesn't need any other page. He doesn't need a growth page data. He doesn't need a projects page data. He doesn't need any page data. He just needs the home page to be downloaded, to be very precise. When he goes to another page, he doesn't need home page. He needs that another page JavaScript, another page CSS to be downloaded. Now, if we can make that happen, basically, that whenever I'm going to a page and that page relevant code only I'm downloading on my customer's client machine or the browser, I think most of the problem gets solved. First of all, you don't have to really make your client browser that much bulky with all the code downloaded. Second is the user experience for the end users also become very smooth. This is where code splitting come into picture. So what code splitting does, underneath is basically it creates different kind of chunks. Okay, the logical chunks from all the JavaScript and CSS file that you write, and you give it as an input to your bundler. And what bundler can actually take it out, for example, Webpack or any other, or Parcel or any other bundler, they can actually help you to create these chunks based on certain kind of logics, right? The logic that you can decide, like how this chunk should be created. And when the customers are trying to load the UI, this UI can get loaded from each of these individual chunks. So instead of loading this entire JavaScript and CSS bundle all together on your client browser, which might take humongous time, now what I'm saying is like I'm just loading a home page, and the home page can be loaded from this chunk. It gets loaded. Now then chunk 2 can load. When there is another route or another page gets loaded, chunk 3 can load something else, and chunk 4 can do something else, and so on. So this is where the code splitting come into picture. This is how the code splitting helps. Basically, instead of loading the mammoth files or mammoth code on your client's browser and making things very slow, also unnecessarily loading things which your clients are not using at that moment of time, instead of that, use code splitting to create the chunks, and thus let the chunks serve the page that the client is currently on or interested in, and whenever the route changes, the page changes, it can start from the other chunks. So I hope the code splitting fundamentals are quite clear right now. Now we'll be moving on to the next question. So in the next question, we will learn about lazy. What's lazy in React? And as you know about the code splitting already, I think understanding lazy will be much quicker and faster. And along with that, we'll also take the other question, which is about suspense. Okay, so lazy and suspense kind of go together. So first is lazy, then is suspense. So first let's talk about lazy. Okay, that's the important part. Let's talk about lazy. What is lazy? So lazy is a function in React. It's like an inbuilt function in React that you can import and use for loading the components, as the name suggests, to load the components in a lazy way. Okay, we have learned about code splitting. We know what is code splitting. If the bundle chunks really grows in size, in that case we are creating different chunks to load the required things onto the customer's browser. So lazy actually help us doing that. Through code splitting, without using any other external library, react.lazy helps us to load the components lazily. That is the main purpose of it. Now if you use React lazy with that, what are the UI you have to really critically you have to load faster. You can actually load them, but something that can load relaxedly, something that you can load with a bit of delay is fine. Those kind of component you can always put inside the react.lazy, and then you can use that. And we know why it is important, because when we do bundling means you are actually bringing all the code components together, and as and when your code increases, your bundle size increases. So what we do, we use code splitting to chunk them out so that we can actually process it on the need basis, like whatever is required. Now with code splitting, we split the bundle into smaller chunks, but we have to load them into the UI, and we have to make them functional in front of your user, right? That's why we can actually load those things in a lazy loaded fashion, and we can actually make them use. So now let's see some code through which we'll be able to understand how to use React lazy. So now let's take a look at the code, that how do we use lazy. So lazy you can import from React, of course, and or you can use react.lazy like this. Then what you can do is, like, lazy takes a function that's called loader function. So inside loader function, you can use the dynamic import to import any components. So for example, you have another component called other component, maybe the same directory where this lazy file is in. So you are just importing it, and then you are keeping this, and what it returns that particular component instance, and you can use that component into your component, the current component. Now this component you are lazily loading, okay? But if you hadn't done this, and instead of that you directly importing this component and using it directly, this is not lazy loading. Why? Because in the first case, what is happening in this case, unless this component you are actually using in your my component, that component trace itself is not there. So it means that your my component, when your my component is getting rendered, until and unless you are really using this into your return or somewhere down the line in your JSX, you are not downloading any code or not using any chunks for other component on your client's browser. So it means that you are not, first of all, you are not unnecessarily putting load on the client's browser. At the same time, what you are doing, like whenever it is required on demand, lazily you are getting your component in and you're using it. That is very good. That is very good thing to do. Now, while we are explaining lazy, there is another part that comes into picture automatically, which is called suspense. So let's talk about suspense a bit. What is suspense? Suspense is again a React component that gives, React gives it out of the box, that we will require for our lazy functions, basically to wrap the lazy components. Okay, why we want to wrap the lazy components is because sometime when you are importing this component in a lazy way and using it, loading this component may take a while. Now, while this component loading is happening, you have to give certain feedback to your customers, right? Like, what is happening? They cannot see a blank screen, or they do not know like what exactly this lazy is coming up with, or which section of the UI it will be impacted. So for this to happen, for this user experience to make happen smoothly, we can use suspense. Suspense takes a fallback property. It has a fallback property that accepts any React element. So using that React element of the suspense fallback property, we can show a loading indicator or anything, so that we can show like when this component is lazily being loaded, or in the suspense we can actually show, hey, this is being loaded. So lazy and suspense kind of come together to solve a problem of a better user experience, better performance kind of structure. Okay, so let's see a suspense example. Let me put a suspense example for you. So here you go. What we have another component, and we have lazily loaded this other component. We know that, and this is the other component where you're using. But what you see here, you see a suspense around, right? And in the suspense you have a fallback, and in that fallback you have like this loading. So what does it mean? It means that while this other component is being loaded, you are actually having a fallback, like you're having a fallback. With that, you are showing this particular component is being loaded. So this is something very cool, that you can use the lazy and suspense together, all together. And even it is not about like just a one component. You can use it for multiple lazy loading component. You can load multiple components, like other component 1 and other component 2, and both other component 1 and other component 2 you can put inside this suspense, right? So that also you can do. So I hope you understand the concept of lazy and suspense well, and you will be able to use them into your application. Thank you very much for listening to this video, and hope you understood things well. So was it useful? If that case, let us know. Please like this video or post a comment into the comment section so that we know that it was useful to you. Up next, we'll be doing another video where we'll be talking about a bit about debugging with a React.js app and the tooling system, that kind of thing. So the sixth video will come up with all those aspects. Until then, take a great care of yourself, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you get notification about much more content that's coming in the future. All right, coming back soon with the next one.